Hello, my name is Matt. Welcome to Unbearable 73. In this episode, I'm gonna review a collection of short stories called Heroic Hearts. This collection was edited by Jim Butcher and Kerrie Hughes. It was published in May of 2022. It's a collection of short stories, all of which come from the associated set of authors who write in what is loosely referred to as the urban fantasy to paranormal romance genre. Every couple of years, this group releases a similar collection. This is usually done to promote the lesser known authors or lesser published ones. Most of Jim Butcher's Dresdenverse short stories are originally published in these sort of collections, before he eventually collects them into a Butcher only story collection. The cover of the book is on the screen right now. And the cover is this is Toot Toot and Luna. They're in the context of the Dresden short story that's in there, which I'll discuss in a minute. So first, let me say something about the urban fantasy slash paranormal romance broad genre. Okay, I think of it in my head as the urban fantasy to paranormal romance spectrum, meaning the similar sorts of characters and settings are in there. And on one end is your classic urban fantasy, Dresden Files, magic in the modern city, and all that. On the other, you have your paranormal romance, where those elements of magic in the modern city exist, but they're purely more towards relationship stories about what you'd see in romance novels. You know? And there's a lot of leeway in between. Okay? But like it or not, as fans, some do, some I don't care. People can want what they want. These authors all write together and read each other's work. Okay, so let's go on now. Let's go on to the book. This book contains 15 parts. The first is an introduction by Jim Butcher. The second part is a foreword written by Kerrie Hughes. Then there are 12 short stories, and finally at the end is an about the author section. The stories and their authors are as follows. And note, if I can identify which of the author's regular novel setting it occurs in, I will. I do that in the section where I review each story, by the way. So just to tell you what the stories are and who wrote them first. Little Things by Jim Butcher, The Dark Ship by Ann Bishop, Comfort Zone by Kellie Armstrong, Train to Last Hope by Ann Bishop, Fire Hazard by Kevin Hearn, Grave Gamble by R.R. Beardy, Silver Spell by Chloe O'Neill, Troll Life by Kerrie Hughes, The Return of the Maid by Charlaine Harris, The Vampires Karamazov by Nancy Holder, The Necessity of Pragmatic Magic by Jennifer Brozek, and finally, Dating Terrors by Patricia Briggs. Now I'm going to give you a short review for each story and provide my rating thereof. Little Things by Jim Butcher takes place after the novel Battleground, as in very shortly thereafter, and shortly before the new short story that was just released called The Law, obviously in his Dresden Files universe. Like many of Butcher's short stories, the main character is not Harry Dresden. The leader in the story is Major General Toot Toot Minimus, the captain of the Zalward's personal guard. This story centers on Toot Toot leading the defense of Dresden's Newcastle home against an unexpected attack. I rate this one 8 out of 10. I felt that one of the noticeable flaws was that Dresden was not depicted as being concerned enough about his vassals. But that's meaning in the Dresden novels, Harry is overly concerned to the point that he almost takes borderline disrespectful because Harry wants to take the burden of everything on himself. But that could be just because, like every single Dresden thing there is, the stories do not employ an omniscient narrator. This is Toot Toot's perspective on events, and Toots is not an omniscient narrator. Just like Dresden is not an omniscient narrator, And one little other issue is I would have liked to see Toots being depicted as slightly more powerful. I felt he got a bit of an upgrade. Toots upgrades as Harry upgrades. So since Harry is his lord and Harry is now a member of the Winter Fae, sort of, Toot Toot's power should scale a bit more with Harry since Harry is now comfortably powerful, so to speak. And as far as being the Winter Knight goes. Okay, and I rate that one 8 out of 10, as I just said. Next up, Dark Ship by Ann Bishop takes place in our series of books called The Others. I've never read anything by her that I can consciously remember, but this story makes me want to read at least the first book in the Others series. This story is about a character known as Det, which is short for Vedette, who lives in a town called Pietra on the Mediterranean coast. She's a teenager who's basically enslaved by her father and stepmother because they want her free labor. It's reached a point where they actually did something to her that makes her less likely to be courted for marriage. She also has magical powers that relate to the sea. This story unfolds as she helps a magical creature called a feral pony that was washed ashore and could not return on its own. Such creatures are often ruthlessly killed by the local overlord area, a pirate known as Captain Star. Det lives in living fear of Captain Star discovering what she did, but due to her saving the feral pony, it leads to an encounter with Captain Corvo Sanguinati and a chance to change her fate. I really enjoyed the story, probably as much, if not more, than any other in here. I rate it as a 9 out of 10. The only flaw is that one might have some questions about how things worked out in the story, because the author did not include enough details about the setting. Now on to Comfort Zone by Kellie Armstrong. This story was tied for least interesting to me in this collection. The premise is that our two leads, Chloe, who's a necromancer, and Derek, who's a werewolf, survive some sort of genetic experimentation intending to enhance their abilities, and they're now in seclusion, being protected by and occasionally doing some work for a mysterious corporation. Chloe sees ghosts, among other things. It's so powerful an ability that ghosts literally harass her because they want her to resolve their issues so that they can move on to the next life. Chloe and Derek have turned down other work, which would let them use their abilities to help others and are just trying to maintain a quiet, low-key life. A ghost named Justin approaches Chloe, and despite her initial and repeated rejections, she eventually listens to him. He assumed the parental role for his half-younger sister and then died. However, his death was by murder, and he had engaged in a bad faith deal with some drug dealers. And now those dealers are going after his sister Gina. Chloe and Derek are slowly but inevitably drawn out of their reclusive life as they get deeper and deeper into helping Justin. I rate this one a 6 out of 10. The quality of the writing was excellent, but the story was somewhat boring, and Chloe was too introspective for my personal taste. Now on to Train to Last Hope by Annie Bellet. I can't figure out what series, if any, of it belongs, but I can't say what series it doesn't. I really like Annie Bellet's series, The 20-Sided Sorceress, and this story is not in that setting. She has a fun writing style and develops her character to such an extent that I always enjoy reading her stuff, which includes this. The story, however, was not as fun or interesting as the 20-Sided Sorceress series. The premise of the story is that a married couple who were both witches lost their somewhat estranged daughter Myra after she left home when she turned 18. They searched, and each mother's grieving process eventually caused their end of their marriage. Each mother moved on in their life to deal with their daughter's status in different ways. The first woman, named Cassidy, believing she was dead, moved near to where the last train stopped before the afterlife was, waiting for the train that takes the soul dead to the afterlife so she can possibly see her daughter one more time. The other woman, named Raina, believing her daughter to be alive, became a reaper, which allowed her the power to search for her while she was performing her duties, which include helping souls and banishing demons. Now, 10 years have passed, and Raina has found a clue, but due to being a reaper, she cannot follow up on her own, so she approaches the one person she knows she can trust in the search, even if that person thinks Myra is dead. I thought this tale was somewhat bland. It had strong emotions, but that's about it. I didn't really care about the character or find the setting interesting. I give it a 5 out of 10, mostly because, again, it's well written, and which, given the authors in question, as well as the two editors, there should be no doubt about that. On to Fire Hazard by Kevin Hearn, which is a tale of the Iron Druid himself, but told from the perspective of his faithful canine companion, Oberon. Now, I've not read the last couple of books in the Iron Druid series. I really liked the first couple, but the series felt like it was getting a little stale to me, and I didn't feel compelled to go back and finish it. I'm guessing that this story takes place before the final book in the series, Scourged. The story finds Atticus, Oberon, and Starbuck the Terrier in New Zealand doing his druid work when an elemental in Australia contacts him about a supernatural entity artificially making the normal and quite severe waterfalls that would have been occurring down there much worse. Naturally, of course, Atticus and his companions head there to deal with the situation as chronicled from the perspective of Oberon. Note, if you've not read the series, Oberon's perspective is rather unique. I rated an 8 out of 10. I might, since there's only 3 more Iron Druid books I haven't read, I'll consider reading them, finishing it, although I don't want to reread the series, which is probably why I haven't gone back. The next story in the book is Grave Gambles by R.R. Birdi, B-I-R-D-I. I keep wanting to say R.R. Vivaldi for some reason. Well, I think it might actually be another author. This story takes place in his Grave Report series of books. It's one of the better introductions to an author's works that's not only in this collection, but any of these similar collections. The story is Graves incarnating into the recently deceased body of a man named Curtis Brown, a man with mechanical skills who volunteered his time at a local daycare center for poor children. The premise of Graves' novel is that he has to resolve the issue or issues that led to the person's death. In this case, the issues are the murder of Curtis Brown and a large number of missing children. Normally it takes Graves some time to figure out what he has to do, but of course, since it's a short story, his angelic handler, whom he calls Church, sets him on his task promptly. Reading this, I wondered if Verdi was somewhat inspired by The Crow when he created the series. Also, Verdi, at least in this particular story, has demonstrated that he understands the concept that sometimes less means more. I rate this one an 8.5 out of 10. Story number 7 in order is Silver Spell by Chloe Neal. This story takes place in the author's Chicagoland vampire setting. It centers on Elise Sullivan, the only natural-born vampire in the setting, who works as one of the city's ombudsmen, which are members of the supernatural community that work to facilitate interaction between the predominantly human police and the Chicago supernatural, so to speak, community. I've read several of the Chicagoland vampire novels years ago. They have several traits to identify them. And one particular thing, one trait, is that if someone, meaning one of the protagonists, doesn't know someone, so to speak, who gets involved in the story, then they eventually will, and those characters return in some capacity in future tales. So, like, let's say they meet a brand new character in book 2, assuming the character doesn't die, that character will inevitably return. So there's a sort of everyone knows everyone's sense of what's going on in the stories eventually. If you don't know what that to begin with, you might find all the connections between the main and supporting characters to be somewhat contrived. They've been built up over time. It's like everyone knows of everyone. Assuming you're good guys live in the city, and the story centers on Elise helping the police solve the ritual murder of a werewolf, leads to the discovery of other murders and a greater supernatural threat looming. I don't think it serves as a great introduction to our Chicagoland series, and I might rate it higher because I enjoyed some of the early Chicagoland books, but I give it a 7 out of 10. So there's a little bit more subjectivity in that rating than maybe it warrants. In the HBot is Troll Life by Kerrie L. Hughes. I can't find any references being part of a series, and there's a lack of online info about this author and her works compared to many others. Troll Life centers on Harzal, a troll who works as a junior station manager on one of the train stations that serves the train to take people from the mundane world to the magical one. Right? Harzal encounters danger and a chance to be a hero, derives from his mundane and desired lazy life when the escaped slaves enthralled to some sort of magical beings come to his train station. Harzal reminds me of Shikamaru from Naruto. I like the character of Harzal far more than like the story or the setting. I rate this 6 out of 10. Again, so the 4 or 5 you get for the good writing, and then 1 or 2 points for liking Harzal a lot, basically. Onward and forward. The next story is Return of the Maids by Charlene Harris. This story is set in Harris's Sookie Stackhouse setting. I read the story before I researched the setting, and it came across as more of a militaristic science fiction story with magic, one of those type of stories. Either the Sookie Stackhouse setting is more expansive than I suspected, or I'm misreading the story. This tale centers on an emergency and somewhat unorthodox response to a mission gone bad. A single survivor from a mission by the Britlingian mercenaries returns, and just long enough to tell 2 of the 3 main characters, Batania and Gait, that there might be some survivors fighting for their life on the foreign world. Batania and Gait appropriate themselves a mage named Vandler and teleport to the planet to either rescue their surviving comrades or seek revenge. The story had its moments, and the setting, or at least this subset of it, were intriguing. However, I already know I don't like the first 2 Sookie Stackhouse books. I read them, and it didn't... I'm not saying I hated them, but they didn't catch... They were well written. There were some interesting characters, but the setting and so forth didn't really make me want to read more of it. I do have to rate the story as a 7 out of 10. Story number 10 is The Vampires Karamazov by Nancy Holder. I couldn't find any series of books setting by the author where this takes place. In fact, this is the one author in this collection who I've never even heard about or read anything that I can recall. I dimly recall that maybe she worked on some RPG supplements over the years. I just have to be correct about that, but The story is a dark urban fantasy. It's about a group of brothers who are forcibly converted to vampirism by their father. One of the brothers, the youngest, named Alexei, either became a Christian monk before he was converted or just after. Even though he no longer thinks he has a soul, he remains dedicated as much as he can to following the laws of God. The story opens when the 3 non-Christian behaving brothers who embrace vampirism like their father come home for a night of partying and feeding. Alexei learns their father may have broken one of the few rules that the brothers Karamazov live, or rather don't live by. I tend to like some of the dark urban fantasy settings, but this one really didn't draw me in. The story comes across as a depiction of an event that might have occurred and was related by telling, not showing in one of her main novels. So, like, let's say these characters just in the main novel and they were telling their origin story to someone else, like, I was with Camaros brothers, our father heard some vampires 500 years ago, whatever it was, and blah blah blah. Like in the main novel, he was telling it, and now they're actually depicting the event of that story. That's what the story comes across as to me. It's very well written, however, and while the setting interests me, the characters don't. I give it a 6 out of 10. Could be 6.5, somewhere in there. The penultimate story is The Necessity of Practical Magic by Jennifer Brozek. This story takes place in the setting for the Karen Wilson Chronicles. Our two main characters are Maureen and Felicia, who are witches, but of a different type and opposite personality. They're friends, but are more like fighting friends, i.e. people who have a strong bond despite disagreeing about everything. Kind of like the Sam and Dean relationship in Supernatural as an example. They fight all the time, but they're brothers, Maureen works in the museum, the Stewart Historical Museum, as a sort of guide and helper. A package comes that immediately starts triggering Maureen's magical senses. She takes it to the director of the museum, Harold Sperling, who opens the tablet and begins examining it. Once Maureen begins detecting the tablet exerting an effect, she goes and obtains help from our friend Felicia, whom she suspects may know exactly what the tablet is and what it does. I enjoyed this story, and if I could ever find out what series of books, the Karen Wilson Chronicles. Obviously, I wrote this before I figured it out, right? I'll probably eventually look into the Karen Wilson Chronicles and pick it up. I rate it an 8 out of 10. And finally, the capstone, Dating Terrors by Patricia Briggs. This story takes place in the Mercyverse, which is a setting that has Mercy Thompson and the Alpha and Omega series. The main character is Acele D'Amour, a supporting character from the Alpha and Omega novels. Now, to understand the story, it will be helpful to know a bit about the Alpha and Omega series and the world backstory that underpins the Mercyverse. Okay, you technically could not know any of this. There are some short explanations, I think, in the story, if I remember the sequencing correctly, but it's more interesting if you know this, so to speak. The rule of the world is the Marach. The rule of the werewolf world is the Marach, the oldest and most powerful werewolf, Bran Cornick. He has a special pack of werewolves where he takes in werewolves who have trouble controlling their wolf, so to speak. In this setting, most wolves, the werewolf and their inner wolf are separate spirits. It's the best way to think of it. Acele, one of the oldest and most powerful werewolves, was losing control of his wolf, which was becoming a maniacal berserker. So he went to Bran so that Bran would kill him before Acele can become a mass murderer. Bran, with Acele now in his immediate pack and therefore able to help use pack magic to keep Acele's wolf under control, he decides that Acele is in fact someone he can save and so elects not to kill him. So that's Acele's backstory from before the Alpha and Omega series even starts, okay? Why he's within Bran's pack. This story takes place, as far as I can tell, after the last 6 after at least the first 6 Alpha and Omega novels, possibly even the 7th. So Acele has recovered to a point where there's a process. That's why I said you need to know this. So Acele has things occurring to him in those 7 novels. And if you didn't know, if you go into them reading it, you might wait a minute. I thought Acele was this cool guy who was helping, So I'm just giving you preference. Read those. If you read this and like it, and you start at the beginning, you have to take a while to get to the point where Acele is like he is now. Acele has recovered to a point where he begins helping Bran on a mission to help protect the werewolf community, though Acele still has issues. Now, in this story, Acele is sent on a mission which starts with a blind date with a woman named Ruby, who is under the protection of a werewolf. I like the story a lot. Acele is probably one of my 5 favorite characters in the setting. I think bridges down moving forward him from a supporting role to perhaps a main role, maybe even his own novel, would be kind of cool. He has an amazing backstory. It's not quite as good as the Alpha and Omega novella that she wrote for our previous collection, which led me to reading all of her books pretty much. I found the Alpha and Omega. I was like, oh, what's this? And I saw that was in the Mercy Thompson's spin-off series. And I'm always a person who reads stuff in order, so I was like, okay, if I like the first Mercy Thompson book, then I'll know I'll probably like and I like this story, then I'll probably like the whole series. And I did. I read them all pretty much in order. Now, you don't need to read any of the Mercy Thompson series to understand the events of the Alpha and Omega series, but I recommend finding a reading guide starting from the beginning of the Mercyverse if you really like this story. It's a lot more weight to the story if you know what happened before it, so to speak. So, my final thoughts, because that's all the stories in the collection. My one pet peeve with this collection, and it's often many collections of books, stories like this, and the reason I knock a whole point or more out of it is the collection doesn't identify which series or setting the stories belong to. So this would have been a 9 as a score. Instead, it's an 8 out of 10 because the authors, the company, the writer, editor, whoever, didn't give you a simple little guide saying, if you like this story, read these books. Okay? So 8 out of 10. Support physical media. Buy this book and have a good time reading physical media and a bunch of mostly good urban fantasy stories. Comment down below if you have any questions for me or about this video or series of books or whatever. Please share your thoughts. Share this video if you enjoyed it. Like if you like. Dislike if you dislike. Subscribe if you want to hear more from me. My name is Matt. This has been Honorable 73. Have a nice day, and I am out of here.